Approximately 70 years ago, I decided to be a vegetarian. What happened was that my mother, Alea Shalom, was very sick with tuberculosis, and for almost 2 years she had to be hospitalized in Switzerland in a sanatorium in Davos. And we children, 3 of us, I was the youngest, were allocated different jobs. One of my jobs was on Thursday afternoon to go to a neighbor and to pick up a bag which had a plomb on it of kosher meat, to bring it home and to open it up and to kasher what was in it. It was usually a chicken. I had to chop off the legs, had to pluck off those feathers that remained, had to cut up, open its belly and rip it open, and then take out all the innards. And this I did faithfully for almost 2 years, and I found it repulsive, truly repulsive. I hated doing it. Kashering it was done by my brother, cooking it was done by my sister. So from that time onwards, I already was repelled by the idea of taking an animal and ripping it apart and then actually eating it. So when my mother came home finally, Baruch Hashem, she was already better, I said, that's it. I'm not going to eat any more meat or any more fish, and I'm going to cook for myself if necessary. And from that time onwards, I haven't tasted either meat or fish.
Why did you make the decision also about fish, especially given the prominence of fish in, herring and Jewish practice?
I also had to gut the fish which we bought in a local shop, in a local fish shop, and it's sort of bloodish, pinkish blood that used to come out, and then we used to pull out the spine and chop off the head. And there were eyes in the head, and the eyes were very noticeable. And you could see the fish looking at you. And in England, at that time when you went to a fishmonger, some of the fish were still floating around in a sort of a basin. They weren't all dead. And they would pull them out and bang them with a hammer, and they would sort of jerk about. It was quite horrific. And for a young person, 7, 8, 9, these things make a tremendous impression on you. So I presume that initially when I decided, it was very much an emotional thing. I think that basar v'yayin, which is a sort of memory of what used to go on in the temple, is something that was never a halakha, but only something which was sort of recommended l'simchat Shabbat or l'oneg Shabbat. There's a machloket whether there's a din of simchat Shabbat or oneg Shabbat. But those people who don't find it a source of joy, but a source of repulsion, obviously are not obligated to eat meat, halachically. And you will remember that when the temple was destroyed, originally the rabbis wanted to say, since we have no nesachim, no libations, we will not drink wine. Since we have no sacrifices, we will not eat meat. Then the other rabbi said, yes, but that's not a feasible situation. And therefore, all we do is leave a little patch on the wall, unpainted, to show that we still bewail the loss of the temple.
So just to be clear, there is no halachic requirement to consume animal products?
No halachic requirements nowadays that there are no sacrifices to eat animals. From the point of view of the halakha of Tsar Bal Chaim, where there's a difference of opinion in the halakha whether it's Doraita or the Rabbanan, as you well know, what is the problem of eating meat or fish or any animal products? Well, I would say that the problems are immense. and the problems at a number of different levels. In the past, people that lived on farms, peasants, let's call them, or rural people, looked after their animals very carefully, fed them well, grazed them well, saw to their good health and their welfare. And when it became necessary for them, then they slaughtered them and they ate them. This is not the situation in the present time, in the last several generations, where meat consumption has become a question of mass production. So firstly, the conditions in which the animals are kept are quite horrendous in many cases. We know that, for example, cows and sheep are transported by ships across the oceans in absolutely horrible conditions, where they wade in their own feces, where they're jammed close to one another, and often their internal and their external organs are damaged. Many of them die of poisoning, gas poisoning from the feces, and are thrown overboard. Many of them are obviously not kosher because they've had damage to internal organs which are not necessarily seen by the slaughterers. So the treatment that they receive, that they get before they're slaughtered, even if slaughtering is done in the most humane, is a funny word to use for animals, but in the most humane nature, the conditions that they undergo beforehand is absolutely horrendous. It's the same with chickens. The way they're put into these cages, and their legs sometimes go outside the cages and get broken, and then they are on a conveyor belt that they fall out of the cage into the conveyor belt, which is halachically difficult because that's a question of nefula, and they're slaughtered one by one automatically, so that sometimes they're not even alive when they're slaughtered. It's amazing. We know that there was a case in Zoglebek, there was a scandal in the United States at a large abattoir. So the fact that they are treated so badly, which is a question of Sar Balei Chaim, also affects their halachic status. So we have to see these things at more than one level. Sar Balei Chaim is forbidden, either rabbinically or biblically. So animals have to be treated in some sort of decent fashion. In addition to that, the sort of mass production requirement is such that in all too many cases, the animals that reach the shops are really not kosher. Many prominent rabbis have pointed this out. So the question is not just Sar Balei Chaim from a halachic point of view, but also from a kashrut point of view. A very good colleague of mine, Rav Shabtai Rappaport, who was a Talmid Mufak of Moshe Feinstein, and who comes from the dynasty of the Sochotchover Rebbe, now no longer eats meat. When he saw a video of the sort of conditions that the animals go through prior to their slaughtering, and he's a very fine Talmid Chacham, but also a very sensitive person, and he understands this.
And did he write publicly about that?
He has spoken publicly about this, yes, certainly. He was interviewed, televised, especially after the Zoglebek scandal. and I'm sure there are others. I mean, there have been recently a number of articles in the media on all the question of hechsherim. It's very problematic. The number of overseers, mefakrim, is limited. The amount of institutions that they have to deal with is very great. If we look, for instance, at the question of kashrut of restaurants, recently it was stated that one mefaker has to deal with something like 1,000 restaurants in Israel, because the Rabbanut doesn't have enough people available for this. The rabbis are not constantly there in the abattoirs. I've been in Argentine and in Montevideo, in Uruguay, and have seen what goes on in the 3 months in which they're involved in mass slaughter of cows, the speed at which they work. There's no mefakeach that can really see what goes on. How often do they change their chalafim, their knives? So I'm not saying, chas v'chalila, that all the meat that comes into the shops is not kosher. But I think that a percentage is not kosher, and we have to be aware of that fact. And the fact that you have a sticker on a wrapped up item in a superstore does not necessarily mean that it has undergone the sort of rigid control that really it should go through. As long as this whole production business was quite small and limited and almost personalized, where a person would go with his chicken to the shochet, whom he knew personally, and see the shchita, and so on, then you want that confidence in the degree of kashrut. But when things are mass-produced on such a vast level, it's obvious that there's going to be a certain amount of treifus involved. The question is it possible to have, on the one hand, this sort of industrial production of meat products, and at the same time to know that it's strictly kosher? I think it's certainly possible, but I think that the price of the product would be so high that people wouldn't be able to buy it, and therefore it will never take place. How necessary it is for human beings to consume animal products, and obviously if for health reasons it is absolutely necessary, then that would counter the prohibition of Tsar Baalei Chaim to a certain extent. That doesn't mean that that would mean that you have to be kind to animals as long as they're living with you, as it were, but then when it became necessary, obviously for your health, just like taking a medicine, as it were, you would be able to slaughter them. I think that's true, but I think that that's true only if you say that it's necessary to consume animal products. Now, in the past, I think there wasn't so much food and such a variety of food, of vegetables and fruit available to people. I remember when I was a kid, during the war years in London, there were no fruit virtually. There were apples, and maybe oranges. And I remember I was a little child and I drew a picture of a barrow boy in London. And I drew 2 squares, and in one square I did round circles, and the other square I did other round circles. And then my brother, who was 3 years older than me, asked me, "What's this?" And I said, "These are apples and these are bananas." He said, no, bananas are like a moon. I said, no, all vegetables and all fruit are around. See, I'd never seen a banana. And we never saw oranges. We had just once a month a bottle of orange juice which was given on a ration card for children. Now that's obviously at a time of war, but going back to the 19th century and backwards still, the sort of healthy, wholesome food that is now available to most people did not exist. It wasn't available. But now we have everything we want. And anyhow, you can also have vitamins.
What is your favorite vegetarian food?
I like Indian food because I lived in India in the 60s. I was a rabbi in Calcutta. I like Indian curry, rice and so on and so forth. And I found India a wonderful country for me as a vegetarian. But I know that the egg farms weed out the little chicklets in their initial days of life, and the female ones that can lay eggs are kept alive. The male ones are thrown out. They don't even kill them usually. They don't even twist their necks. They just throw them on a rubbish heap. I've seen this in Chofetz Chaim and other places. In fact, we actually, once we were on holiday in Chofetz Chaim, and we found a few of these little chicklets, fluffy little yellow, nice little chicklets, and we took them home, and we had chickens that lived for 10 years on our roof. But they weren't females. But one of them was a female, and one of them actually laid eggs once every 2 days or something. So I think that obviously goes strongly against the laws of Tzar Ba'alei Chaim. I think it's even worse when you leave an animal to die than when you kill it sort of quickly. And then, of course, in the chicken industry, they keep them in small cages and they can't move, and they feed them with all sorts of chemicals in order to make them fat. They don't really have a life of their own, and I think animals have a life of their own. And people don't seem to realize they have pets. They have dogs that they look after, and they spend money and they buy special food for them. And some of them even take them to a hairdresser to be looked after. And they have cats that live with them, and they buy them these frisky things which cost money. They never think that, there'll come a time and I'm hungry and I'm going to cut their throat and take the fur off and eat them up. That's a question of kashrut, but I'm not talking from a kashrut point of view. I'm talking from a human point of view, an emotional point of view. It doesn't occur to them. But a chicken, you don't think about that. A fish, you don't think about that. You don't think of them as sort of alive. The little goldfish that children have in their little aquariums, and they put little bits of food in. And they're so sad sometimes when they fall out and they die. And little things. And they don't think of what they're eating. Every child has seen a cat crying when it's hungry, or after a fight when it's has an eye scratched out. They've seen dogs moping when the owners go away, or waiting to be stroked or cuddled. They know that they have feelings. They're sentient. They know that they have degrees of intelligence. They know blind men live by their dog's intelligence. Um, and cats know how to find their food. So they may not be human, but they have feelings, and if you hurt them, they'll cry, they'll scream, they'll fight back to protect themselves.
Let me just follow up with one thing.
But some people say that chickens are stupid and fish don't feel. That a dog is smart, but a chicken and a fish, like, these are lowly creatures.
I don't know, some people are also not so smart. they still feel. Chickens feel. Break a leg of a chicken and see how it reacts.
What about fish?
Fishes flap because maybe they don't know how to talk. So they don't. If you don't hear them, you think that they don't feel. But they have nerves. I mean, a scientist will tell you that they have nerves. They know how to go in direction. They know how to avoid eating little fish by being eaten up by big fish, by sharks. They have intelligence of some sort. They may not know algebra, but not I. The question, I think, is what's the relationship between the sort of formal halakha and what we call meta halakha? Meta halakha is something that is sort of overriding, all-embracing principles of morality and ethics, into which pattern halakha has to fall. So there are biblical statements which are fairly clear on this issue. V'asita yashar v'hatov. You should do what is right and good. It's not defined in any way. It means that all our actions, whatever we do, has to be straight and good. So if we were to do something which, strictly speaking, is permitted or not forbidden, but not good, it would go against V'asita yashar v'hatov. The halachic formulation of this is called naval birshut HaTorah. A person who can act in an absolutely disgusting fashion without actually going against any specific halachic instruction. I think this is something very, very important and very basic to an understanding of halakha. That halakha has also to be moral. When we talk about Tzar Baalei Chaim, we remember the story of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who, according to the sources, suffered very greatly in the latter years of his life. And that was because he acted in an unacceptable fashion to an animal. He said, "Luchach notzalta." The animal was bleating, it was being taken to slaughter. He didn't express any sympathy for the animal. Now, halachically, he didn't do anything wrong. And the animal was taken to slaughter, and presumably it would be slaughtered in an admirably kosher fashion. But this lack of sympathy, this is what he was punished for. So obviously there exists a whole stratum of moral requirements which must not be trampled under the how to say, the short vision of the technicalities of halakha. Now we know that the Nazir, who was the Talmid Mufak of Rav Kook Zatzal, wrote Chazon HaTzimchonut VaShalom, in which he tried to develop the vision of ultimate vegetarianism. Rav Kook in Olat Ra'iyah, in his Perush on the Siddur, twice indicates that he, who was not a vegetarian himself, saw that the ideal state would be one of vegetarianism, and that the sacrifices la'atid lavo would just be menachot and nesachim, meal offerings, and libations of wine. So they both, Rav Kook and his disciple, distinguished between the present situation, which is a non-ideal situation, and the visionary ideal situation where we would all be vegetarians. So they saw the consumption of animal products as a situation which is b'diavad, but not something which is in any way ultimately acceptable. I think that they would have also agreed that what you put into your body, what you eat, what you digest, what actually becomes a part of your physical body, has obviously a physical effect upon you. But it also has a spiritual effect upon you. And kashrut already indicates this, in the sense that we only eat things which we slaughter in the most humane manner possible. Ever min achai, taking a limb, ripping a limb off an animal and eating it, of a live animal, is forbidden by law. Oto ve'et beno, you can't take a mother and his child, or father and his child at the same time in order to slaughter them. Shalach teshalach et ha'em ve'et ha'banim tikach lach. You take a bird out of the nest, you have to send away the mother bird. So the Bible thought that animals were sentient and felt these things, and in any case, if you're not sensitive to living creatures, then you won't be sensitive to people either. And so these halachot are there lezakek et hanefesh, to purify the soul, in order that in human society we are more positive individuals and relate to one another bein adam lechavero in a more acceptable fashion. If we're speaking about the educational difficulties in persuading institutions and parents in schools, in yeshivot, to take a more positive attitude towards vegetarianism or to animal care, which is not the same as vegetarianism, obviously. Then I think the different strategic approaches. We know, I think it's fairly clear now, that meat consumption, people eat too much, and that has an impact on their health. I think, parents want their children to grow up healthy. They don't want them to be obese. They don't want them to have heart troubles at an early age, or at any age, I guess. And so they should understand that in any case, one has to reduce the meat consumption to a much more limited level. Now, if they feel that halachically on Shabbat they're obligated to have basar v'yain, so once a week, b'diavad, let's say, okay. And that also should be brought in addition to that, which would reduce the degree of meat consumption. You have to take into account the halachic issues, which also have to be explained, and it can be shown from films and videos that exist, the sort of problems that do exist in the whole meat production business. Our animal consumption problems exist. I think that in yeshivot, in the sort of yeshivot that I learned, in Lithuanian yeshivot, there were two types of shiurim given. There was a shiur iyun, which was Gemara, lechidudei, in order to sharpen the mind, and there was a Mussar shmuz, once a week, which was given not by a Rosh Yeshiva, but by a Mashgiach. And the Mussar shmuz dealt with ethics, and it dealt with the relationship between man and his neighbor. And it was aimed at trying to improve the moral and the ethical state of the Talmidim. That was the point of it. It may have started off with a halacha, or with something related to Parshat HaShavua, but then it went on to discuss the spiritual and the moral implications of the original source that they were dealing with. So I think that it's not difficult to suggest that without making any sort of clear prohibitions or limitations on the recipes of the meals of the members of the yeshiva, of the Talmidim, the Mussar shmusim could put a greater emphasis on the whole aspect of the nature of life, not just human life, but all manners of life. Of course, that gets into a much broader issue of ecology and going beyond the animal kingdom into the plant kingdom. But what is much easier to comprehend is the life in an animal. It's more difficult to see it in a potato. But you see it in a cat, in a dog, or in any other type of pets. And you go to a zoo and you see these fluffy little monkeys, naughty little creatures, obviously highly intelligent, who'll snatch things out of your hand if you give them a chance. and grin and laugh at you. So you know that they have life and understanding. You don't eat them because they're not kosher. But were there not the restrictions of kashrut, why not eat them like anything else? Except that you realize that there's something stopping you from doing it emotionally, psychologically. And that becomes an ideology. I don't think it's an easy task to change people's eating habits that have been developed over so many generations. But we've made great progress in all sorts of areas. There's no reason that we shouldn't aim at trying to make progress in this area too. Let me tell you a story. We have 10 kids. 6 of them are vegetarians. 2 of those 6 are actually vegans. The others were in the army, and in the army it was very difficult to be vegetarian, so they became Ovrei Avera, from my point of view. We lived in Katamon, and near their gun was a place where on Erev Rosh Hashanah they used to do the kaparot. And there were these cages, boxes of chickens, and the people used to come, and they used to take a chicken, they used to wave it around their heads, and there was a shochet there on the spot, next to a gan yeladim. They would shech the chickens, they would flop around until they were properly dead, and then the people would take them home. I think that's one of the reasons that many of my children became vegetarians, besides the fact that they never were given any meat. A person that sees these things gets a different perspective on what they're eating. And to think that you're actually putting this into your mouth. I mean, would they eat a frog? No. Like Chinese people would, but they eat everything, monkeys, monkey brains. It's difficult to know what God's reaction to our behavior is. It was God who told us not to inflict pain on animals. It was God that told us Oto ve'et beno. It was God that told us Shalach teshalach et ha'em. And I think the sources indicate to us that originally it was only B'sar Kodshim that was eaten. Animals that were sacrificed. Kodshim Kalim, those parts of the animal that could be consumed by the owners were eaten. But Shchitat Chulin was not exactly something that was encouraged, as we can see from the earliest development of halakha. So, if you ask me what God sees looking down on us, he's dissatisfied with us in general. Not just because of that, because of many other things that we do. But I don't think that he would be pleased to see the way that we're treating his creations. He is the one that put some element of life into them, some element of understanding into them. He is the one that created the nerves that they feel pain, with which they feel pain. I don't think that it's possible to think of El Rachum V'Chanun Sherachamav Al Kol Ma'asav, on all the works of his creation, could be pleased when he sees the infliction of pain upon animals. I think that you know better than I do all the sort of statistical elements of the sort of damage that we're doing to the earth, ecologically through animal production, farming, methane, how much less deleterious to the atmosphere, to the world in which we live, if we ate more grain and less meat. So the fact that we're damaging the ecology, and I think that's fairly acceptable, I mean acceptable, not acceptable, fairly agreed upon, is actually something which is contrary to the notion of Pur Revu, because it becomes more difficult for us to populate the world in a positive fashion. There are other very serious problems of the uneven distribution of populations in the world, concentrations, great concentrations in some areas and sparse concentrations in others. And there's an uneven distribution of food, which is a very serious issue. And there's some countries which are glutted with food and they actually destroy great amounts of grain because they, either to keep the prices up or because they have no way of making use of it. And there's a cost for keeping it. It's cheaper to burn it. So the human population has to work out at a global level how to deal with the great increase in population and the great inequalities or in the conditions of those populations, which is partly due to the uneven distribution of the natural resources. And the natural resources means all aspects of natural resources. And that also moves you into the area of ecology.